Bleeding purple and gold. From the heart of Los Angeles, this is the LakersNation.com podcast with your host, Trevor Lane.
Welcome to today's show. As always, we are powered by CLNS Media and LakersNation.com, your one-stop shop for all things Lakers. The NBA free agency period is coming up. We are less than a week away at this point, and it's going to be a big one for the Lakers. We know they have more cap space than any team available in the league. They've got their sights set on some big stars, guys like LeBron James and Paul George. So I brought in Keith Smith of Real GM, Celtics blog, and the Front Office Show podcast to help break down what they can do with this cap space and what might happen with some of these guys, including Julius Randle. Keith, thanks so much for hopping on with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
So the Lakers are in an interesting situation cap-wise. We know that they are going to have more cap space than any team in the league at this point, but the big sticking point is going to be Luol Deng, right, and trying to deal with that contract.
Yeah, 100%. I fully expect them to, with one notable exception being Julius Randle, but I expect all the other free agents to be gone. I expect them to waive most, if not all, of their non-guaranteed players, and then that's going to put them, at a ton of cap space, and they can only get more if they can figure out a way to get Luol Deng off the books.
Are you surprised, like I kind of was, that they made that 25th overall pick and didn't trade it? Because that does add a little bit of salary onto their books.
I was a little bit. I thought there was a chance they might flip that down the line, trade it for a future first or something like that, where then they're not in a position to have to worry about the cap space as much because they're hoping obviously to use so much of it this summer. But I think there might have been a little bit of out there from other teams of why are we going to help these guys? Why do we want to help them get cap space to go sign a couple major free agents? And that might have been a sticking point, as well as they might have just found no deals that they really like to do that.
Right, yeah. I mean, we certainly have heard that angle from the whole trade talks with the San Antonio Spurs, and they wound up getting Mo Wagner, but it looks like it's going to add about $1.7 million onto their cap, and it's already going to be razor thin as they're trying to land guys like LeBron James and Paul George. So I guess we should probably start there. If they are able to, let's say both LeBron and Paul George say, hey, okay, Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka, you smiled at us, you winked at me, Magic, and we're going to sign. How much cap space are those two guys going to eat up if they have max deals?
Yeah, about 65.6, 65.7 million. That's based off a cap of 101 million. LeBron obviously slots into the highest tier there, the 10-year plus veteran tier. So he's at the 35.35, and then Paul George is in that next tier down, the 7 and 9 years, and he's at 30.3. So you total the two together, about 65 and a half, so a little bit more than that.
And that's a good point that the cap is at $101 million, but that's right now is just an estimate. We still don't know for sure what
Correct.
The cap will really be at, so these numbers could change a little bit.
Yeah, and what the really important thing to note on that is if the cap changes, it used to be that the max salary slots were locked in. Now they're tied to the cap. So I've heard some kind of, I think, confusion about that maybe is the best way to put it, where I think it's people who maybe their teams didn't have cap space the last couple of years and haven't followed it. But in the new CBA, it's tied. So if the cap goes up, the max salaries will raise accordingly as well because they're now locked into, for what matters to Lakers fans, 30% of the cap for Paul George, 35% for LeBron.
Right. So things could get changed a little bit, but probably not all that much. The NBA is usually pretty close to being right on with their numbers in terms of their cap projections. So at this point, you can tell me if you've got the same thing here, but I've got the Lakers, if they renounce guys like, assuming they let their free agents go, guys like Brook Lopez, Isaiah Thomas, guys like that, and then they renounce guys like Tyler Ennis, Thomas Bryant, and Ivica Zubac, which I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen. I know they really like Thomas Bryant, but if they end up just letting those three guys go, I've got them sitting at right about $48 million in cap space.
I've got them actually a little bit more than that. I've got them at, if they dump all. Oh, I see where you're coming in though, because you still have Julius Randle's hold on the books, right?
Yeah, his hold. I still have his hold on.
Yep. Yeah, so that would be right. Yeah, you'd be right around, a little bit less than that, a touch less, about 47, almost 48 million.
Right. Yeah, so they're maybe right in that range, and we know they have to get to 65, 66 just in order to fit in Paul George and LeBron James. So as it stands right now, a lot of people just make this assumption. They say, oh, they have the room for two max slots. That's not true.
No, it's not, and that's why it's really important. And it's and then the next thing is you point that out and they're like, oh, well, one of them will take less. Well, that's also an assumption you can't really make. Is I don't know that either one of these guys is just going to jump on board with saying, hey, I'll take a little bit less to make it work and fit us both in.
Right, yeah, and especially LeBron. I mean, he's historically said that he wants to take the max. He doesn't want to set the precedent of stars taking less money in order to help their teams.
Yeah, correct. He said he did that once to go to the Heat, that he's not going to do it again. He owes it to all the rest of the players in the league because he feels like if he does it, then ownership will come back and say, well, why can't everybody do it? I think if it was maybe take, a few $100,000 less to make it work, then I think, he's not going to quibble over that. But if you're talking taking millions less off the top, that's something that he's just not going to do.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that completely. I don't think he's going to take less. And Paul George probably won't as well. I mean, he's a guy that's going to be looking to get his maximum amount of money that he possibly can. So that Julius Randle number that you mentioned that I do have worked in there, he's at a $12.4 million cap hold. And I had some people asking me this today. There's basically no reason why the Lakers would not at least tender him a qualifying offer, which they have to by June 30th, right?
Yeah, the only way they're going to do that is if they know going into June 30th, which would be, a flagrant violation of the rules.
Right, exactly.
Which maybe the Lakers aren't too opposed to that, the way things have gone a little bit here lately. I'm just poking fun. But I think I would be stunned if they did not tender him at least a qualifying offer, because what that does is that allows you the flexibility. You have a little bit of time where you can pull that back from him and then renounce him. And that's something we actually saw the Celtics do with Kelly Olynyk last summer. They tendered him the qualifying offer. Then once they had a commitment from Gordon Hayward, it knew they had to open up the max salary slot. Then they pulled the qualifying offer, and then they renounced Kelly Olynyk later, and that's how they got to their max space. So I think the Lakers will take a similar approach with Julius Randle.
Right, yeah, they have that safety net there where if something happens, LeBron James and Paul George end up coming, and there's no way they can free up enough money to keep Randle. Worst case, they can always pull back that qualifying offer and go ahead and renounce him. Of course, we don't really want to see that happen. So I guess that's the first thing we should really get into here to really sink our teeth into. How can the Lakers land LeBron James and Paul George while still keeping Julius Randle, knowing that he's sitting at that $12.4 million cap hold?
Yeah, so I ran a ton of different scenarios on this, and I can't get there numbers-wise, because the most I can get them to, and unless I'm off, but little inside baseball here, Trevor and I talked, and I am on vacation, so I was doing this a little bit on the fly, but it looks like if, let's say they renounced everybody, waived everybody they could, but kept Randle, and then they stretched Luol Deng's contract, they're only at about 50, let's just round it and call it $58 million in space, which still leaves them shy of those two max salary slots. So I'm not sure. At that point, you're really looking, you got to clear Luol Deng, because the difference between his $18 million salary and his stretch number, which is 7.4 million, that would obviously then clear just about enough to where they need to be to get there.
Right, yeah. If you were to stretch Luol Deng, and the rules on stretching a contract are this, that you can double the length of the contract plus one. So for Luol Deng, he's got a 2-year deal, so that would push it to 4 years when you double it plus one. That means you're stretching his salary out over 5 years. And his salary is it's just about $37 million over the next 2 years. So that would mean that they'd be paying him, if you were able to stretch him, about $7.3 million over the next 5 seasons each season. And he would be dead money on the books, can't do anything with that contract. It just sits there, and he would be waived and would get to go play for another team or do whatever he wanted to do. And I came up with the same thing. There is no way to stretch Deng and still keep Randle. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, the numbers are just too tough. And so this is where two interesting things that I want to bring up, because I've heard this come up with Luol Deng specifically as well, is where people say, isn't there a process, though, where that number that's stretched can go down if he signs with another team by whatever he signs with? And there is. But here's the challenge is that number, let's say he signs with somebody else. Let's just make it easy. Let's say it's $1 million. Mm-hmm. That could come down to $6.3 million, but it doesn't happen until the season is over. So if they stretched him right now or going into next season, then what ends up happening is he's going to be at the $3 million, but after the 2018-19 season. It's a process called set off, which is basically the player saying, hey, I'll give some money back if I can recoup it by signing out elsewhere.
So obviously that's not something that's going to help the Lakers this summer land these guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it doesn't even matter if he agrees to it. It's not going to do anything this summer. Now with Randle, here's the complicating factor for him and his cap hold is the way it used to work with cap holds was it was just enough lower, but they've all gone up in percentage again under this new CBA because what teams were doing. We saw this famous example recently was Andre Drummond had a comically low cap hold.
Right.
So the Pistons kept his cap hold on the books a couple of years ago, did all their offseason signings, and then they re-signed Drummond to his new deal. And what the NBA and the Players Association agreed to do was essentially close that loophole in the new CBA where cap holds for guys coming off their rookie deal, which is where Randle is. They've raised those cap holds up enough, and that's why he's sitting at that almost $12.5 million.
Right, yeah, that was something that I believe the Spurs did that with Kawhi Leonard, and I mean, it was something that teams were doing all the time. Yep. So they've put a stop to it. Unfortunately, they put a stop to it right before the Lakers could have really used that. That certainly would have been helpful. But yeah, and now how about if Deng takes a buyout? What if something happens there, and if he agrees to accept a little bit less money? How would that all play out?
Yeah, so if he agrees to take money off those next 2 years or even just enough off one of the years that gets the Lakers to a better spot, then what they would still probably do is still stretch him unless he really took a huge haircut, which I wouldn't expect him to do.
Right.
But if he took, let's say, $6 million off, which then gets them in the range, or $8 million or whatever, then he can do that. He can agree to whatever, and then you're taking that 30, almost $37 million that we talked about. You're taking that $37 million cap hit. Instead of being stretched at over 5 years at 7.3, you're stretching whatever he lowers it to over 5 years. So maybe you're getting it down to, let's say he takes $5 million off, and now you're at 6.3 because it takes off about $1 million a year or something like that. You can start to get that into the range where it starts to make a little more sense for the Lakers. Challenge there is I don't know what Luol Deng's motivation would be to give anything back. Generally, when players do that, it's because they want to be somewhere else and they know, like, hey, I can still play, so I'm going to take this buyout here. I'll give you some money back to gain my freedom. You go somewhere else. A good example of that was Dwayne Wade did that last summer with the Chicago Bulls. He gave a bunch of money back because he didn't want to be on the Bulls anymore. He wanted to go play for the Cavs, which that didn't work out either, and he ended up back with the Heat at the trade deadline. But that was the goal for Wade was, hey, I'll give money back because I want to be somewhere else. In Deng's case, I don't even know that anyone else would sign him, so I'm not even sure, that he's going to give any of that almost $37 million back.
Yeah, ironically, I think that the only way that Deng really looks to do something like that is if the Lakers don't land those stars this summer, and then there goes their incentive to move him. And then he would know he would be stuck not playing another season, in his twilight years, maybe one of his last chances to play. Then maybe he would have some incentive for himself to give back some money in order to be able to go to a different team. But otherwise I don't see him really making that move either. So let's say then that at this point the only way to really make it happen would be to move Luol Deng and get nothing back in return. Right, you have to find a way to trade him to a team that can absorb him into cap space. And then, based on my math, then it can actually work. You could keep Randle, you could land LeBron James, you could land Paul George. It's still tight, it's close, and I'm including the empty roster spot charges, but you could do it. Are you coming up with the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Then you're clearing off. You're well clear. You actually clear more than what you need, so you have a little bit more left under the books. You'd be at about. You're clearing about, doing the math here, about call it 17 million. So then you're up around, 75 million or so. And that's 10 million more than what you need to sign James and George both. So that would be ideal. Obviously, you'd have to pay probably a hefty price. And generally, it's about every $20 million in dead salary, which is what Deng is. Teams ask about one first-round pick. The challenge is what you would run into here is I think the Lakers would be kind of put over a barrel and forced to pay a premium because other teams, if that's what they're looking to do, these other teams know this is what the Lakers' plan is. They're only going to do this if it means this is what they have to do, and they may say, hey, instead of one first-round pick for each of those 2 dead years, we'd like 3 total or swap rights or something like that, and that becomes just that much harder to work with.
Right, yeah. I mean, because the value of those Lakers picks would go down. If the Lakers are suddenly very motivated to trade Luol Deng, that means they're getting LeBron James, they're getting Paul George, they're getting these superstar pieces, and therefore those picks are probably not going to be very good.
Exactly.
So
they're going to be
kind of value.
Yeah, then you added the other kind of complicating factor in there.
Right.
See, people are going to come back and say, well, these picks stink. So what do we want? A pick somewhere, 26 and later in the first round? It's that. Then you're saying, hey, I want a couple, because at that point what you're hoping for is, maybe this is only, the good life for a couple years and everything falls apart after that.
Well, let's talk about this. Do you think it would be worth it if it meant you're able to keep Randle, knowing what he was last season? He was probably the team's best player. He showed flashes of absolute brilliance last season. He was really impressive. Would you pay that price if it was you, or would you just stretch Deng and then let Randle walk in order to sign those 2 guys if it was up to you?
So I'm going to flip it. So you're the Lakers guy.
Yeah.
And here's my worry. So let's say you bring in James and George. Now you've got James, George, and Ingram, who are all probably, they can play together, but it gets a little dicey because they're all 2 threes, right? I mean, in some extent. LeBron, you really kind of put him anywhere. But I think in order to do that, if you're going to keep Ingram and then you're going to keep Lonzo Ball, let's just assume, now you've got Ball, Ingram, George, and James, which means LeBron's going to play full-time power forward, which he's a little, reticent to do, I guess is the best way to put that. And now you're going to put Randle. Is he going to be your 5? I would worry about your defense in that situation. I don't. I like Randle a lot, but he's not a traditional rim protector. He's not going to do those kind of things. So I would worry about that a little bit. So what I would almost do is if you're going to keep Randle and you're going to bring in James and George, I think the logical move there, that maybe the way you free it up without having to move Deng, is do you look to move Ingram, and maybe then you can move him, get a couple picks for him potentially, and then what you're looking to do is now you've got those extra picks, then you could move Deng, and now you're freeing up even more salary to help fill out what would be a very thin bench just in terms of numbers. That's kind of what's been floating around in my head, and I know Lakers fans hate the idea of trading Brandon Ingram, but that's just where I keep coming back to. That seems to be the logical next move in this progression, because I think your roster fit ends up very weird if that's the direction you went.
Yeah,
and I know I didn't answer your question at all.
No, I see what you're saying with the fit. I think you could maybe close with that lineup. I agree that Randle's not a full-time center. He did show flashes of being able to play the position last year. He actually his defensive numbers improved tremendously as he got himself into better shape. And so he was actually a plus defender at the rim, but no, he's probably not a full-time center. So there's certainly an issue there. So you'd be taking Ingram's positive value and then in some way either trading that for picks or attaching him to Deng and using that to move Luol Deng. I guess the question that comes up then is, would the Lakers roster be attractive enough to bring in Paul George and LeBron James if you're removing a big piece like Ingram? Or is that a deal breaker for those guys that they no longer have Ingram to play alongside, or what? Again, that would be something they'd have to talk to LeBron and Paul George about.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I only think it might be attractive to them from the standpoint of they're probably looking at it and saying exactly what you said. Is that your closing lineup? And they might only play 10 minutes a game together at most, last 5 minutes or so of each half. And I wonder if what they look at is if we can move Deng by attaching Ingram, or move Ingram for picks, and that gets us there, then we can move picks to dump Deng. Either way, it's attaching Ingram to Deng, and it just directly or circuitously. Then I think what you're looking at, if you're James and George, is now we get all this other money. We can go get a handful of other guys. Then do you bring back a Brook Lopez on a 1 year team friendly deal, or somebody else, and everything just seems to it starts to fit a little bit more. A couple of LeBron James guys out there, his buddies. Do you go out and track down a couple guys out there that make sense? And then all of a sudden you're starting to put together a team that really fits well because you created all this extra money on top of what you needed to sign the 2 big free agents.
Right. So there's some extra incentive there. If you can move Dang's contract, if you can kind of bite the bullet and figure out a way to get him gone. You mentioned Brook Lopez there, and that's another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because at his exit interview, Brook Lopez mentioned that he'd probably be willing to take less money if the Lakers had a championship ready team. He's from Hollywood. He's a guy who's from the area. He frequents Disneyland. He's there all the time. So I don't think he wants to leave Southern California. Is there the possibility, and Eric Pincus has talked about this, but do you think it's possible that Brook Lopez maybe could take a 1+1 deal that's a little bit cheaper, knowing that he can then get paid more in the summer of 2019 on kind of a wink-wink agreement? Obviously, it can't be done officially on paper or anything like that, but just in order to help ease the numbers a little bit.
Yeah, I 100% think you could see that. There's no reason why that wouldn't be, in the realm of possibility. I think the process for that, how that would ultimately work, is they would renounce him and then re-sign him to a, really, because you still need to create you need to turn him into zero initially. Mm-hmm. So you turn him into zero, then you re-sign him later down the line, and now all of a sudden you're kind of back into a spot where you've got him, and you're still sitting there with his bird rights and able to pay him whatever you need to going forward.
Right, and that would make a lot of sense. Now, let's say that they are able to move Dang, and that's not going to be easy. I mean, I don't want to just assume that, because that's going to be a really difficult thing to do. But if that happens, if they land Paul, which, I mean, hey, landing Paul George by itself is not even a lock at all. But if they land Paul George, if they land LeBron James, let's say they start adding some pieces and they get a little bit closer to that cap, are there any exceptions or anything they could use to go over the cap to bring back maybe an Isaiah Thomas or a Brook Lopez or anybody like that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So how the exceptions work is once you drop underneath the cap by an amount that adding back to combined value of the exception, so in this case would be the non-taxpayer mid-level as well as the biannual, if you're under the cap by enough that those combined don't bring you back over the cap, you lose them, and then they are replaced by the room exception. Mm-hmm. And again, if we're talking about spending $65 million in cap space, you're going to have to be well under the cap to do that. And that room exception ends up $4.4 million. You can either use that on one player, you can split that up on multiple players, and that's what I think they're probably going to be looking to do. Sometimes teams will use it on the one guy, kind of get somebody in. They go back to, again, the Celtics. That's how they got Aaron Baines last summer, and proved to be a huge addition for their team, especially as they went deep into the playoffs and against the 76ers. So they used their room exception on him last year, and that would be a tool that the Lakers would have. That could even be what they use to retain Brook Lopez and bring him back. And in Brook Lopez, if he really wants to play ball, he could say, give me $2 million of that, and then you've got $2.4 million to go play and get somebody else.
Right. Now, obviously, that would be a dream scenario for the Lakers, but I mean, Brook Lopez was making over $20 million this last season, so that would be a big pay cut for him to take. But he did have a pretty solid season for the Lakers. There's a lot of people who complain about his rebounding and things like that, but I think he's a better player than he gets credit for. So it would be certainly advantageous if the Lakers can bring him back on a cheap number. Now let's talk about the league as a whole real quick, because we know that cap space is going to be in short supply around the league. There just aren't that many teams with a whole lot of room. So when we're looking at a guy like Randle, who's going to be a restricted free agent, what's the market going to be like for these guys that are hitting free agency? I mean, we've got Isaiah Thomas and Brook Lopez as well, but a lot of guys out there are going to be competing for not a lot of money. So what do you predict the market kind of being like that's going to start up in less than a week here?
Yeah, so let's talk Randle specifically, because as a restricted free agent, and this is playing it out as the Lakers hold on to his rights, as a restricted free agent, this is arguably one of the worst summers on record to be a restricted free agent because of what you just mentioned. I only projected to be about 5 or 6 teams that have cap space this summer, and one of those is probably coming off the books because it looks like the Indiana Pacers, rather than waiving a lot of their non-guaranteed and partially guaranteed players, are going to do some extent of just running it back next year. So that's going to probably take them out of the mix to be a cap space team. So now you're looking at teams like the Chicago Bulls, the Dallas Mavericks, the Lakers, obviously, and then the Sacramento Kings. So you're really looking at a lot of bad teams. And those bad teams, they either aren't going to be in the mix for these restricted free agents, because the only way you get a restricted free agent away from his incumbent team is if you overpay him by a significant amount, and because you have to make it so the incumbent team won't match the deal. So that's there. Now, what a team like Dallas could do, or Sacramento, or really anybody, they could put the Lakers in a bind by saying, hey, I'm going to throw a ton of money at Julius Randle, because it's not like you're getting stuck with a bad player. He proved last year he's a quality NBA rotation big man. They could throw a big deal at him and then put the Lakers in a bind where it's, crap, we either going to let this guy walk for nothing or we have to match this. And knowing their other plans for cap space, that puts them in a tricky spot. I don't necessarily expect that to happen, but it could happen. And we've seen teams do that before. The Brooklyn Nets famously have done it a couple different times with players where they, threw them a big offer as restricted free agents, and then force their other teams to match. And for the Nets, part of the play was, we just want to take these other teams out of the mix, for not only this year, but at least the next couple of years down the line.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they went hard after Alan Crabb, and then it wound up trading for him a year later.
Yeah. They also, and they did that with Tyler Johnson, who's now on one of the more ridiculous contracts for, play. I mean, Tyler Johnson's not a bad player, but he's not a $19 million a year player, which is what his salary will be this year. And then they did it last summer with Otto Porter, who they extended a full max offer sheet to and forced the Wizards to match it, because the Wizards were in a position where they had to, because if they didn't, they had no way to replace Porter. So really, it's a game teams can play. The challenge is this summer there's only a couple teams that can do that, and those teams aren't necessarily sitting on max cap space either. So it becomes one of those deals where you do that, you're really looking at more of a position where it's the team's probably more likely to match. The Lakers, it just is complicated because they have other plans for their cap space.
The Brooklyn Nets just messing with everybody out there.
And, you know what? Good for them, though, because after, good for Sean Marks and crew as the, front office there, Sean Marks and Trajan Langdon, because they came into a mess, and it was their play is, hey, we don't have draft picks. This is the way we can maybe get some of these high upside young guys is, go out there and throw these big deals at them. And they tried their best. And, and it's funny, I tweeted earlier today, or it was last night, I can't remember what it was, but it was a picture of for the first time the Nets real GM pick tracker. That's a good tongue tied. Sheet has them with all of their own first round picks. So that was just kind of a fun thing.
Got to be a good feeling in Brooklyn. And hey, real quick, I do want to get back to the whole Randle thing, the apocalyptic scenario where the Mavs or somebody throws a big offer at him. But real quick, I'm seeing a lot from Lakers fans. They're saying, hey, Timofey Mozgov just got traded again, and it only cost 2 second-rounders. Let's explain why that's not the case, why we can't compare that to the Luol Deng situation.
Yeah, it's not, because they took on $23 million this year for that. So that's exactly what it is. It might seem that that's what it is, but really when you think about it, what they did was they took on $23 million this year, so a difference of about $7 million. And then to trade $16 million next year, they traded 2 second-round picks. So you have to break it down a little bit into that kind of thinking. Now, that's even a little more questionable, because I've seen a couple of people say, well, can't the Lakers take back? Well, they can't take back any money, because they need to turn Deng into zero if they can do anything, or as close to that as possible. So you can't take back money. And then on the flip side is, sure, if they could dump him, send in second rounders, they'd send every second rounder that they could possibly get their hands on out of town. So yeah, that's just a challenge there.
Yeah, that was the initial furor from Lakers fans, where the outrage was that, oh my gosh, Mozgov got traded for 2 seconds. Why would we have to give up first to trade Luol Deng or anything? They didn't, though. I mean,
Yeah.
Dwight Howard has an incoming salary. It was more than what Mozgov was making, about $7 million more. So the Nets are paying more this season. No, they don't have anything to pay next season, whereas Mozgov's contract does have more on it. But you can't really compare it like that when the Lakers are trying to get zero back for Luol Deng, which is going to be tough to do. Anyway, the whole Randle situation. Let's say, and this is the big fear of Lakers fans right now, let's say that Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks say, hey, you know what? We're going to mess with the Lakers. Let's give July 1st, 12:01 a.m., we're forking over as big of a deal to Julius Randle as we can. Let's say they offer him $20 million. I've been saying, hey, that isn't necessarily the end of the world because of the way restricted free agency works and something called the moratorium. So let's get into that. Why is it that the Lakers may not be in such a huge rush? They actually have a little bit of time here.
Yeah, so there's a waiting period to match on restricted free agents. So what would happen is moratorium as of today is scheduled to end on the 6th of July. So what happens is July 1st opens the new league year, and that's when you start seeing, Woj right at midnight tweeting out, hey, this guy's signing with this guy, which always makes me laugh because if you can't talk to him until 12, how at 12:01 do we already have these contract agreements? There, seems like it should be more complicated than that.
Oh, so that's man, the Lakers were known for being the team that never did that under Mitch Kupchak, and the one time they did, it's 12:04 a.m. I'll never forget it, and it's Timothy Mozgov, $64 million.
Yeah, and then followed by Luol Deng for 70-something million after that.
72, so,
painful. Yeah, painful. It's but it's just again it kind of makes me laugh because here are the Lakers getting slapped on the wrist, which maybe Magic was a little more blatant about it than he should have been, about talking about guys, but everybody does this to some extent. But anyway, yeah. So back to your question about why this isn't too much of a worry. So July 1st, teams can talk, teams can agree to deals in principle, but no one can be signed until July 6th is when the moratorium is scheduled to end. Occasionally it ends a day or two earlier. Occasionally it could take a day or two longer, but it's generally probably going to be right around that 6th date. We could get into why the moratorium exists, but no one really cares. It's a bookkeeping thing. And it's to make sure the salary cap is set correctly. But anyway, what happens then is the 6th is when the Lakers clock would start, if you will, to match that offer sheet that Randle signs, and they have 3 days to do so. So they would have 3 days to really match that and get to a point where once it's delivered to them, and that's where the Knicks famously played games a few years ago where they ran and hid from the Houston Rockets, I believe it was, for Jeremy Lin.
Oh, that's right.
They made them so scarce where they couldn't give them the offer sheet. And the NBA has actually cleaned that up and removed kind of that you don't need to. It's not like being served a summons to appear in court where they're going to track you down and find you. Now it's more of a just, hey, we're doing an offer sheet. Here's how you get it. It's all delivered electronically. But anyway, that's where
that at 2 days.
Looking. Is it? You know what? You might be right. I think maybe they did change it to 2 days.
I think it's on the
I would have
CBA,
to look to be certain, but I think you're right. I think actually you are right. That's my fault. I'm incorrect because it went from a week to 3 days to 2 days. You're right. So what that does is that gives them 2 days where they need to decide we're going to do it. Now, here's the part that a lot of people get confused about, though, is what they'll say. So let's just use your example and say Dallas throws him a starting salary of $20 million for that first year, and he signs the offer sheet. The Lakers cannot go back and say, hey, can we do $17 million? Because we think with that once it's an offer sheet signed, there's only two decisions you make. We're going to match it or we're not going to match it. And when you match the full terms of whatever was put in there by in this example, the Mavericks to Julius Randle. You have to match the whole thing. So that's where it does become tricky. And you are right. It is 2 days. That was my fault. I apologize.
Anyway, that's a great point that they have to accept the full terms because there are things that teams will try to sneak into those deals to make it less likely that they'll match. And I don't remember what the rules are as far as how much can be paid in advance, but they'll put in clauses that'll say things like X percentage of the salary to be paid before the season even starts or by this date to try to make them fork over more cash and not be able to delay it at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what the Nets did with Otto Porter. They used everything that they could. So it was still a max contract, and the cap number can't be changed, right? That is what it is once you get to that max number. But what they did do is they said 50% of Otto Porter's salary, which was about $24 million in that first year, that needs to be paid, and it's like on like October 1st or 15th or something like that. And that's 50% of his salary needs to be paid up front versus the every twice a month installments every 2 weeks installments. That's how most NBA contracts are paid out. So it doesn't change anything cap wise, but what it does is just one other headache that a team has to say, all right, now I got to pay this guy all his money up front and do that. Now, fortunately, we don't have NBA teams that aren't going to be like, hey, wait, and can you cash that check next Tuesday? Because by then we should have the funds and it won't bounce. If an NBA team's in that situation, we get a lot of other problems. But it's just one thing you do to make it tough. The Nets also threw in a player option on the last year, because then you look at it as like we're matching this guy for a 4-year whatever contract, but he has say over that final year and all those kind of things. So it does make it a really tricky process.
So even if Randle does sign that big contract with the Mavs, and maybe he doesn't, maybe it's another team, or maybe nobody's interested in him, we'll have to kind of wait and see how it all plays out. But if he does sign that contract July 1st, 12:01 a.m., signs on with the Dallas Mavericks, realistically, the Lakers could wait all the way until July 8th before they would have to make a drop-dead decision one way or the other. And the hope, and there's no guarantee of this, but the hope is that by then LeBron James and Paul George will have figured out what they're doing, and then the Lakers can go and make a decision from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you're hoping. There's and LeBron has been traditionally a guy who he kind of waits. I think he knows the whole league waits on him. Yep. But I think this year, Brian Windhorst was the first one I heard mention it publicly, that he thinks it's going to be quicker. I think that was on the Low Post podcast that he said, I think it's going to be July 4th or 5th. He's going to want to, have it out there and be done. And he mentioned it for a couple reasons. One is he thinks he's just done with the circus around it. He just wants to move on to whatever's next and get moving in that direction. And the other piece was, I do think this is one of the things that says to me is a good sign. If it's being put out there that he might decide quickly, to me, that says this is a good sign that he is going to go to the Lakers, because he knows the Lakers have to do other stuff to make other things happen. And I think that is LeBron saying, hey, I'm going to give you an answer early so you have time, maybe even before you have to make all these other decisions. That's what's been kind of floating around in my mind, is that's what I think is going to happen with LeBron here, because I do think that's where he's going, and I think that's the thought process behind why he may decide early.
That's a great point. I agree with you at this point. If you asked me a month ago, I probably wouldn't have said that he's going to the Lakers, but it kind of feels like the wind is blowing that way. But I've said this before on the show. Then again, I didn't predict him going to the Heat. I didn't predict him going back to the Cavs, so I don't know. Who knows what that means. But right now it does kind of seem like things are lining up for LeBron to indeed head over to the Los Angeles Lakers, which some Lakers fans will be excited about, and some right now are not too thrilled with. But you know what?
Yeah, can I bump in on that real quick?
Yeah.
So just two things is, obviously I just said I think that's where he's going to, and I was in the same boat, and I do always believe with LeBron, nobody knows but him. And I don't even know if his agents know, if his family even knows. I think they might find out 5 minutes before he says, whatever he's doing. Right. But I think the fact that he continually mentioned how involved his family was going to be in the process this year, and how important that was that they get a say, and they obviously have made it at least somewhat clear, I think, that they would like to be in LA. I think that makes it, more likely that that's where he's going to go. And I think he can play it as, this is where my family wants to be. I want it, I'm happy to be here too. And that makes it a little easier as far as backlash on him. But then the other thing is, I want to touch on the last thing you said is there's people out there who are like, we're not happy if he comes here. That's such insanity to me. This is the best player in the world, right? How can you not want the best player in the world? That doesn't make any sense. And it was the same way, there was that week where it's, hey, he might come to the Celtics. And there was legit Celtics fans who were like, I wouldn't give up Jaylen Brown for him. And I was like, are you guys like, what world am I living in here? He might make Kyrie mad. That's why Kyrie wanted out. Good. Make him mad. He's the best player in the world. And he's showing no signs of slowing down. Why are we making this harder than it needs to be?
Absolutely. I concur. My wife is actually one of the people that does not want to see him end up with the Lakers. So it's a funny little back and forth that we have. But But yeah, I agree. I mean, he's such an amazing talent that even if he rubs people the wrong way, and he's had the rivalry with Kobe, of course that's been kind of internalized by Lakers fans, and all that, the whole Kobe versus LeBron thing that gets rolled up in here. Still, bottom line, he's one of the best players, if not the best player in the world. And of course, there's concern that he's going to bring in all of his buddies and kind of run the show and ship out all the young kids. And those are certainly valid, but that's where you just have to trust the organization and trust that if he does show up, that he's not just going to be given the keys to run the entire franchise or anything like that.
Yeah, you get LeBron, you're automatically in the mix for the finals, and you just deal with whatever comes with it. That's now unfortunately, if he leaves the Cavs have a mess to deal with for at least the next couple of years, partially courtesy of the Lakers, who quite frankly won that trade this past trade deadline. But it becomes a that's something, that's the price you pay for having go to the finals or be in the mix for the finals every year.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those things that you just kind of deal with it if you're ready to win right now, and that means you've got LeBron on your roster. Now, before we wrap up here, should the Lakers not wind up getting either of these guys, either LeBron James or Paul George, what do you suspect they'll do with this mountain of cap space that they've got if they don't land those guys?
I think you're going to see them to some extent run things back. I think there becomes no one else who's worth spending that kind of money on. Maybe they renounce a couple of the free agents, maybe Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, just to free it up. And they might go after guys on 1 year, big kind of overpay deals, which is what they did last summer, which I think worked out pretty good from that extent. So you could definitely see that coming. You could also, they're still going to be in the mix for Kawhi Leonard. That's not going to change. So I think they can still look to do something on that end, whether that's through just creating cap space to absorb them, or if they're going to package pieces together, whether that happens this off season or if that extends into the season or whatever it might be. So I think that's where you're looking at is probably a similar approach to this past year, but it might be with guys who are a little more targeted towards winning now, because I think the kids are a little more ready to step forward and win now, whether it be Ingram. In that case, I think they definitely retain Randle. Lonzo Ball, hopefully healthier. Kyle Kuzma turned out to be a really good player. Mm-hmm. So I think then you start looking at, we're going forward in 2019 and 2020 summers. You've got some really good free agents, and that's when everything starts to free up a little bit more. Luol Deng, obviously, after this year becomes an expiring contract, infinitely easier to move. And at that point, if the Lakers are still sitting, he may be more valuable to them as an expiring than anybody else. So I think that's what you're looking at is, let's run it back, but make a couple more targeted signings towards being competitive right now.
Agreed. Yeah, I definitely think that's the route that they'll go. Some people have suggested maybe they could absorb a bad contract or something and pick up future assets. They certainly could, but I would have to think that they're going to focus on building on their win total. They won 35 games last season. I think they'd like to try to hit that next level. Who knows? Maybe even sneak into that 8th playoff seed, although maybe that's setting the bar a little too high if they don't land anybody new. But hey, if they stay healthy, then I think that's certainly not off the table.
Yeah, for sure. They were, in a lot of ways, I think, better than some people thought. And that was battling a lot of injuries to some key guys throughout the year, especially Lonzo Ball. I don't know I'm sure but whatever his game played numbers were, they were fairly low. Yeah. And he was out for a good chunk of that, kind of that mid-season area there. So, that's a big guy to just get back in the lineup and have, healthy, just from the standpoint of everything seemed to run a little smoother offensively, when he was there. So I think that's where you're just looking to keep it moving forward and building around the kids with some veterans who aren't going to hurt them and take away from them. And that's what I think they got out of KCP and Brook Lopez last year. Those guys are good complementary pieces. The last thing, I don't think they'd bring back Isaiah, just from the standpoint of Isaiah's a great player, but he's Isaiah, right? He needs to have a somewhat dominant offensive role, and I don't know that's where you want to be.
Yeah, that's possible. I know they liked what he brought to the locker room. I know the Celtics liked what he brought to the locker room as well. Yep. But on the floor, it can be a little tough building a roster around him.
Yeah, you got to commit to him to say, we're going to do this. I think it's still more likely that he's going to either go somewhere. I still think like a team like the Orlando Magic, who needs a starting point guard and needs someone who can score the ball, makes a ton of sense for Isaiah Thomas. Or what you're looking at is he's going to go to a really good competitive team where he can be like the Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams type off their bench and say, hey, we shoot it 10, 15 times a game in the 15 minutes a night you play and get after it that way. I think there's that possibility too.
You know, it was kind of funny. This is just last thing here. The other night, draft night, when the Lakers were doing their post-draft press conference and Rob Pelinka's doing his presser and everything, there's Isaiah Thomas out on the floor behind all the media, and he's putting up shots. So it's it's late at night. He's there. It's almost like he knew, and so he was there like going, hey, yeah, we got some new draft picks, but don't forget about me, guys.
Yeah, he's always that way. I love that guy. I will never, he's always one of my favorites. I famously put out on Twitter when Celtics traded him, he's my daughter's favorite player in the world. She's 8, so she's pretty fickle about these things. So she likes Kyrie quite a bit now too. But she loves Isaiah more than anybody. So, I'm never going to, have anything bad to say about him. He, helped the Celtics get back to a point where they were relevant. And quite frankly, if he didn't do what he had done over the last couple of years, they don't get Al Horford, they don't get Gordon Hayward, and that has them back in position to contend. One thing that I want to tag in real quick is I really like what the Lakers did in the draft. I think Mo Wagner is a good player. I think he's really going to fit well, whether that's a first big off the bench. I eventually think he could be a starter if you had the right center next to him. I think he's that good of a shooter. I think he could do a lot of things. I think he's a more athletic Ryan Anderson, and could really help. And I liked Svi Mikhailiuk too. I think he's a really good player for what the NBA is looking at now. I know a lot of people are like, well, what's the comp? And I've seen some people be like, well, he could be Kyle Korver. That's going too far. Kyle Korver is one of the best shooters of all time in the history of the game.
Ceiling would be Kyle. If everything breaks just right, Kyle Korver.
And if you got that out of a second rounder, that's
that's amazing.
That should earn Rob Pelinka a lifetime contract. But it is, but I think it's, what you're looking at with him is guys who can shoot the ball always have a home in the NBA, even if that's all they can do. Those guys are always good for, again, 15, 20 minutes maybe off the bench in those kind of roles. So I really, think he could be a good player for them. And Isaac Bonga, who I don't think that transaction's official yet, but I think he's going to be a good, solid developmental player down the line.
Yeah, they certainly added some interesting pieces, and I agree with your assessment. I like that Ryan Anderson comp. I've been saying Kelly Olynyk is kind of a similar comp, but maybe Ryan Anderson's even a better one.
Yeah, Kelly Olynyk is a little weird because he's so awkward. He always looks like a baby deer on the ice for the first time just because he slides all over the place and is always slipping and sliding and falling down. But he's actually really, really skilled, and I don't think he gets enough credit for just how skilled he is. So I think he has the potential to be, more of an Anderson type, meaning Wagner. He has a chance to be more of an Anderson type just because of his ability to shoot the ball. He's also a pretty good rebounder, but he's a little more athletic, which allows him to switch a little because that's what's killed Anderson these last couple of years and had him really off the floor. There's nobody he can defend anymore, and I think Wagner will hold his own on that end.
Yeah, agreed. At least we certainly hope. Fingers crossed that he's going to be able to do that because that's a big question right now.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Well, Keith, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. I mean, you're on your vacation and you took the time to come on here, so certainly appreciate you coming on the show today.
Happy to do it. No, yeah. I mean, it's one of the things, as I said, hey, this is my fault for planning a vacation leading up to free agency. But, it's the NBA at this time, it never really stops. It's, August is about the only time we, those of us who cover the league get any kind of break. And last August, we didn't even get that because of the Kyrie Irving, trade dragging out into towards the end of August. So we got about 2 weeks at the end of August, early September. But it's great. I love it. We're sliding this one in there. I'll be back and ready for the start of free agency. And before we know it, we'll all be in Las Vegas for Summer League, which, I'm really looking forward to. So it's a fun time on the calendar. And if you're a cap and roster guy like me, this is the best time of the year.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. I mean, we're 2 weeks away from Summer League. At least I'll be in Las Vegas in 2 weeks, and I cannot wait. I'm on pins and needles. Can't wait to get to Las Vegas for Summer League. Listeners, if you guys haven't been, it is a great time for NBA nerds out there to go and just experience the whole thing. Summer League in Las Vegas is amazing. So definitely recommend everybody take the trip out there and check it out.
I call it. Go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to say I call Summer League Comic-Con for basketball fans.
That's a great comparison.
That's really what it is. But the other thing I want to say is when the Lakers and Celtics played last year in Summer League. Now I live in Orlando, so I go to a ton of Orlando Magic games. They're not very good lately, so the crowds haven't been overly electric. That crowd was bananas. It was crazy. And this was a Summer League game. And I realized it was Lonzo Ball and Jason Tatum and, all these, good, exciting guys. But those people were going absolutely crazy, which was a lot of fun. So it's, definitely, I tell everybody if you can get out there and check it out, especially for the money you pay, you're never going to get closer. For paying such little money to, good, NBA players, especially if your team's got, one of these high draft picks, that's the place you want to be.
Oh, I don't know. I think Vegas gets your money eventually.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it depends. Yeah. The NBA may not get it. And, UNLV may not get it. Might be a little further down the road. So some people probably make out okay.
All right. Well, hey, guys, this was my guest was Keith Smith. You can find him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. Always awesome with the salary cap and all the minutia that we need to know in order to figure out exactly what the Lakers can do here. So certainly appreciate him coming on. He writes for Real GM, Celtics blog, and, of course, hosts the Front Office podcast. So we will be back next Monday with another show, and that's going to be right after free agency starts. So hopefully we've got some breaking news about the Lakers on that show. If there's anything that happens in between then, we'll do a Lakers Nation news feed. Once again, my name is Trevor Lane. Thanks so much for listening, guys. You can follow me on Twitter at Trevor_Lane, and make sure you guys head over to LakersNation.com for all the latest breaking Lakers news. See ya.